willing to risk what you know now for what you'll know later? A lot of the times we're afraid to do certain things in our lives because we're afraid to surrender our present moment. A lot of us think that our present moment is going to be forever, and a lot of us are scared because we're uncertain about what's going to happen in the future. But the truth of the matter is, you cannot move forward, you cannot progress unless you're willing to take certain risks in areas of your life that you're unsure about. You don't need to just speak it, you also have to put action to the things that you are willing to do, and those are going to require you to take risks. I think about it like this. Sometimes God will test us with what we have to see if we are able to trust Him with what He's going to give us. And so an example of that is, let's say you only have $5 to your name, and God tells you to tithe or to donate that $5 to somebody, right? It is a risk to give that $5 away because you know that you need it. You're uncertain about the future. You're uncertain about, what will come up and how, using that money or giving that money to somebody else will affect you negatively in the future. And so in that moment, you're like, well, do I take the risk and trust God and walk by faith and not walk by sight and give it to this person who He's telling me to give it to and be obedient? Or do I keep this out of fear that I'm never going to get anything back, out of fear that this will never return to me? And I think that it's always hardest to take risks when it comes to money because we're living in a very uncertain time economically, but we're also very afraid of what will happen if we make mistakes. You can make mistakes in relationships and mend those mistakes. You can make mistakes in your personal life and mend those mistakes. But when you make mistakes with money, you never know if it will come back to you. But somehow, some way, the bills get paid. Somehow, some way, you end up with a job. Somehow, some way, the debt has been cleared. And that always is everybody's testimony. It always happens that somehow things work themselves out, especially when it comes to money. And so I grew up in my household with two very extremes of this. So my mom was very, money comes and goes. If I spend it, I'll get it back. And it wasn't that she was thinking in abundance, but she was taking risks in certain areas because she believed that she would get it back. Whereas my dad was very frugal and he was very penny pinching and he lived in scarcity a lot. Every single thing was about, I don't know if I'm going to get it back. This is uncertain. I'm not willing to take this risk. And so he would hold things close to him and walk by sight all the time. He would never walk by faith. For my mom, things always came back to her 100-fold. For my dad, I'm not sure what happened because he always penny pinches. He always holds his possessions closest to him. And the Bible tells us that if we're not willing to lay down our possessions and give away our possessions, we're not worthy of the kingdom of God. If we're holding these things higher and above God, these things have become our idol. And so I'm not just talking about risk with money, but I know that that's a very hard one to take. An example in my personal life is I'm moving across the state, right? Like I'm completely moving. And so something that's really, really hard for me is making certain financial decisions and making certain decisions in general for my life. Now, I had been praying over this specific apartment that I wanted, and I got a message earlier than I expected, right? So God was moving very fast on my behalf, but I had a decision that I needed to make. It was between two apartments, and one of them was the exact one that I prayed for, but it was smaller and it was more expensive. And the second one, I didn't even want to consider it, but it was larger and it was cheaper. And so in that moment, it seems like, you would know the exact decision to pick. Like, you're obviously going to want to pick the one that's larger and cheaper. But I was nervous to take that risk and go for something that I didn't originally want. But in that moment, I had to choose to be obedient, right? And take the risk of signing a 1-year lease somewhere that I didn't exactly want at first, but this is somewhere that I feel like God is drawing me to. And even just moving across 4 hours across, it's like, certain times we think, well, what about the people that I'm leaving? What about the environment that I'm leaving? What about my family? What about my friends? What about the things I've always known, the things that I've been familiar with? And we're afraid to leave these places because it is a risk and it's not easy. And by no means am I trying to say that this process is easy, because you can gain everything and you can lose everything, but we will never know if we don't try, right? And the more that I grow up, the more that I realize I'd rather be able to sit there and say, I tried and it didn't work out, than I didn't try and I don't know if it would have ever worked out. So in these moments when we're taking these risks, there's things called calculated risks. And that's where we plan ourselves out strategically and we start to ask God in our time with prayer what we should do, right? A risk is always going to be a risky decision, but we can always have counsel and talk to God, and God always talks about having wise counsel in order to know what it is that we need to do in order to show up as the best version of ourselves or to strategically take on this risk. And so we need to be devoted in prayer during these times when we're doing things that are out of the norm. You know, people in your family haven't done this, people around you haven't done this, and in these moments when you're taking these risks, people will criticize you, people will, you know, look at you like you're crazy, like you don't know what you're doing. People will give you unsolicited advice based on their fear, based on their own inability to do things because they don't see themselves doing what you're doing. And so it's very important to take everything that people say to you with a grain of salt and always take it back to God so that he can confirm it by 2 or 3 witnesses, because people will tell you unsolicited advice and people will spew fear into your plans. And that's why a lot of the times when we're making these calculated risks, we have to also be careful who we're going to for advice or for counsel, because it can make us doubt ourselves. And that's the whole next point of being able to do this. You need to bet on yourself. You need to trust that where God is taking you in your journey, that you know what you're doing and you're doing what's best for yourself. Of course, people are going to give you advice based on who they think you are. You can be around your mom, you could be around your dad, you could be around your friend of 20 years, and they can give you advice based on who they think you are. But the truth is, nobody knows us better than we know ourselves, and we are constantly changing, we are constantly evolving, we are constantly doing new things. People do not know us better than we know ourselves, and in certain seasons where we're changing and we're growing and some people can't seem to understand that, we need to be able to only, if the situation permits it, we need to be able to only rely on God's advice and what God told us to do in our own self, right? Sometimes you cannot go to people with these plans because you know they're going to speak fear into your plans. Sometimes you can't go to people with your plans because you know that they're not going to give you the best advice that you're looking for, or they're going to speak negativity into your plans. And so you need to be able to bet on yourself. And honestly, in situations like this, you have to think, what's the best that can happen? We always think about what the worst that can happen is, but what is the best that can happen if you move to a different country, if you move to another city? What is the best that can happen if you go to a job that you actually like? What is the best that can happen when you finally start choosing yourself? What is the best that can happen when you risk everything you've always known to start following a new way of life? What is the best that can happen? And in these situations, I'm not saying that struggle, I'm not saying that hardships will not arise, I'm not saying that struggle is going to be unavoidable. In certain situations, you're going to have to struggle in order to learn how to live the way that God wants you to live. And I'm not saying that every single time you get something good, you have to struggle for it, but sometimes you will have to endure hardship in order to build character. So in those moments, that doesn't mean that those bad moments or those moments of struggle or hardship does not mean that you made the wrong decision. It does not mean that you've chosen the wrong way. It just means that you're struggling. And in those moments, you need to really take time in prayer to ask God for strength, because a lot of these things we cannot do on our own. And so in the midst of you planning strategically and in the midst of you really tightening up your circle and tightening up your corner and making sure that you're doing the best decisions that you possibly can do for yourself, you also have to expect God to respond to your faith. When we're walking by faith and not by sight, we look insane, we look crazy, we look like we're out of our minds. Like, people will look at you like, there's no way in this economy you're making this purchase. There's no way in this economy you're leaving your job to start this business. There's no way in the world right now that you're cutting these. Like, people will definitely judge your journey, because a lot of people live based on fear. A lot of people watch what is happening in the world and apply that to their lives. But the Bible tells us to not pay attention to the ways of the world, because his ways are not our ways and his thoughts are not our thoughts. And so if the cattle on 1,000 hills belongs to God, you need to expect that God will respond to your faith. You need to respect that God will respond to your radical obedience. a lot of the times when we're being obedient, we actually are taking risks in life. And so you have to trust that he sees the good that you're doing and he's going to reward it, because he does respond to faith. And sometimes he'll do it suddenly, or sometimes he'll wait till the nick of time to do it so that he can get the glory out of your situation. But whatever it is, you need to understand that in all of that, you need to risk what you know now for what you will know later.